Welcome to the dark side of devotion. Your hosts Sarah, Anthony, and Stephanie. How you guys doing?
Hey, how's it going?
Good. So excited.
Yeah, super excited. I think it's been a long time coming, guys. I think we've been brainstorming, talking about this first episode, and I guess, like Anthony likes to say, fall forward, right? Let's do
Oh,
it.
fail
Yep.
Always
forward.
Fail forward.
fail
My
forward.
favorite phrase right now.
Exactly. So I'm Sarah. We're gonna be discussing this podcast regarding religious organizations. They're from the good, the bad, the ugly. I don't think that there will be a lot of good in our conversation.
Unfortunately.
Yes, but we can speak with the. I think the good thing that came out of it was how we've met, right? So, we've met in the Boogie Down Bronx. So
Yes.
I had I had just arrived in the United States. So the Bronx was where I was living the most. So, Anthony and Stephanie. So Stephanie starts with you. So how did you we like how we came along, right? So start with you.
Okay. Well, so obviously if you're watching this by the name alone, Dark Side of Devotion, I'm sure you can understand where we're headed with this stuff. Um, I think our intention is to bring light to things, but of course, with a lot of love and a lot of intelligence and emotional intelligence. And it's so crazy to think that my entire journey led me to this place, led all of us to this place, right? Where we all know each other and we're all friends and we're all able to share experiences and
Exactly.
resonate with each other. That's awesome. So, I started going to the church, the Universal Church, when as a child, a few times here and there, but I didn't really get converted until I was 14. When I was 14, that's when I really dedicated my time, my energy, my effort, just everything to the church, to the cause, right?
Okay.
Um, about a year later, that's when I met Anthony. And then a few years down the road is when I met you because you were working in
Exactly.
Queens. And I remember for a big event, you came over and you were an assistant for that event. But you had been,
Yep.
I learned recently speaking with you that you had been an assistant in the Bronx church where I came up from years before I even converted. So, like,
Yep.
you know so many of the same people as me. Like, we have been within the same circles and you shed light on so many things. So it's been
Yeah.
awesome. It's been awesome, to like share these conversations and have these
I
chats. And I'm
almost
so
feel
glad.
like I'm the dinosaur of like everyone
Oh,
here. But it's good. It's good that we can go reminiscent, right?
This
And
is just the
then
yeah.
OG. It's the OG.
exactly. So Anthony, how did you come up with the Universal Church?
My family originally came to the church because of the TV program. Like a lot of people, they advertised that they had the solution for spiritual problems, which my family was being afflicted by. We'll get a little bit more into that good stuff later.
Of course.
But we arrived to the church looking for help, basically. I was maybe 9 or 10 the very first time that I stepped foot there. And my family went on and off. I didn't get really serious until probably around 15, 16 years old. And then
Okay.
things started taking off. And in the process of me basically getting serious in the church, becoming an assistant, and eventually a pastor, that's how we ended up crossing paths. I was about to get shipped off to train to become a pastor for the very first time when we crossed paths in the studio. I think I was recording my testimony for the first time that day,
Yep,
if I'm
I
not
remember.
mistaken.
Yeah, I remember. And I
Yeah.
was working at one of the odd jobs that we have to do in the church. So a little bit about me is I never started in the church. I was born in it, right? So that's why I always speak as myself with everyone's life because I've crossed paths with at least one person or in like
Yeah.
we did. So that's why I like to say the good is that now we are here and we are coming up on the other side, right? And then we're going to also discuss the bad and the ugly parts of it, but this first episode would be kind of just like behind every act of faith, every devotion and praises to the Lord, there always is a dark shadow behind it. So in the darkness, it just lurks things out there, right? So this episode one is basically we're just going to go over a little bit of the background. And I think some of the things that I'm going to say may sound new to you guys, because you guys, I think the church was founded here in the 80s, but I think you guys started in like mid 2000s, or like in the mid 2000s,
Yeah,
like
early
right there,
for me.
right? So, but I'm gonna go a little bit, kind of like taking you guys back a little bit, and then kind of fast forward. But we are going to mostly focus in the United States. But I'm going to be taking you guys behind where how does the church do what they do, right? What is the mechanics and kind of the psychology behind it, right? So the
Yeah.
universal church background, how it started. We will deep dive into different eras of the church. We'll mostly focus in the United States. That's where I ended kind of like my chapter, where you guys were born here, right? In the United States. So how you guys also began and ended your chapters. And you know, I was born in Brazil. I was born in the late 80s and lived in the late mid 90s and late 90s in Africa, and then came to the United States in the early 2000s here. So I've gone through all the different eras of the church, and the church is actually, started, even though it started in South America, they've actually grown into this worldwide organization, right? So I'm going to go over it so I've been to 3 different continents, but they are all over the world. Like, I believe, all the continents, that I think that they have set foot there as well. So my discussion would be mostly drawn into the church's kind of like the back behind the scenes, as kind of what I saw behind the scene, my experience. And then my discussions will also be around the founders and the major key players, right? How he thinks, how he basically shouts orders, how he kind of creates kind of like what the universal church, the beast that it is today. And I'm also going to bring in a little bit of the psychology behind it into our discussion. So, you know
Love
go ahead,
it.
guys.
Yeah,
Yes.
and you have a great perspective, being born in the church as a bishop's daughter. You were behind the scenes, behind the curtain, from what most members or even assistants would know, right? You heard
Yeah.
conversations coming up, then probably assuming you're a kid, right? That you wouldn't be able to catch on. So I'm really excited to hear some of this behind the scenes stuff that we're talking about.
Yeah. And as a kid, I think a kid, like, it's great that you brought it up, Anthony, because I don't I don't view myself like, my childhood is like, was mostly acting more of an adult mindset rather than actually being a kid. And you guys are gonna see a
Mm.
little bit
Yeah.
when I deep dive a little bit of my background, the rules and regulations, how I was supposed to act. So yes, I mostly sat in rooms where adult conversations were taking place, and I was listening. I was just that, the saying, the fly on the wall. I was definitely the kid stuck by the wall, just listening. And believe it or not, a lot of people think like kids don't listen. I heard a great deal of things, and kind of that kind of played a big role as to why I'm no longer part of the church anymore. So, without any further ado, so if you guys are thinking, so what is the organization that we're talking about? We are talking about the Universal Church of the Kingdom of God. That is how it's popularly known, but it can also can be called the UCKG by its short acronym. The other ones is Stop Suffering. That's how they market themselves in the English program, the Stop Suffering. They go by different names, and then in Spanish is Pare de Sufrir. In some South American countries, they are known as the Oración Fuerte al Espíritu Santo as
I
well.
didn't know that one. That one surprised me
Yeah.
when you told me that.
Yes. And it's actually, the reason behind it is that the Universal Church, or Igreja Universal do Reino de Deus, in South America, they had tons of like bad media in the 90s, and I'm going to deep dive into those. So
Mm.
when those medias blow up, kind of like just shared amongst like this church, so their names became tarnished, right? So like, what people don't realize is that the church actually follows tons of rules. So if they're about to begin operating in a particular country, they're going to follow kind of like what they need to be registered as. So they register themselves as a corporation, as a non-for-profit organization, but it's a corporation. And majority of the time, every single church in any part of the world in which they must operate, because they are not-for-profit, they need to be approved by the government. So if the government says no, they can't come in. So how did the church come in? By changing its business name, the business name, right? A little bit of the
Rebranding.
business rebranding. So that is kind of the names. But they also, I think, Anthony, you can talk about, like, you also operated in one of their another branch name. What is it called?
Yeah, in the US, I mean, they wanted to attract the Americans, right, in the US, and they know that they do a quick Google search and they would never step foot in the building, so they rebranded as Succeed in Life Center. So it wasn't even a church or a religious thing kind of in the name, and they branded themselves as like that kind of church with courses and like just self-help and that kind of perspective and
As
tactic.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's different names that it goes by, but don't be surprised if the pastor behind the pulpit has a Brazilian accent. Most likely is the Universal Church.
Even
And
if
that's
he's
why I
not
like,
Brazilian,
even
he's
if
gonna
it's
have
not
that
Brazilian,
Brazilian accent.
It's
right?
true. It does spread. It
It
does.
does.
Like yeah, it's almost like a virus, that accent, as well. I think it's the one of the main things that people tell me, like, oh, you don't sound like a Brazilian. I'm like, there's a reason why.
But
There's definitely
sidebar, nothing against how Brazilians sound, by the way.
no,
Oh
at
no,
all, at
not at
all.
all. And nothing against the language in general, because I love Portuguese. I love, being
Yeah,
able to speak it and understand it. But I do feel like my culture got washed away from me while I was there, because Anthony is a witness. I lost my Spanish. I feel like 75% of my Spanish had went down the drain when we
you
were
had to
like in
relearn.
ministry. Seriously, I remember specifically a woman walked in and the bishop wanted me to tend to her because she only spoke Spanish and we were in English at that time. And I was struggling to speak, and words that came out were like Portuguese or Portuñol, as they say. Like
Yep.
Spanglish is Spanish in English, and Portuñol is Portuguese with Spanish. And a lot of my culture, like I'm starting to relearn and regain all of that in the last recent years,
Yep.
which I'm sure as well, because that's all a part of it. It's part of the entire experience.
Absolutely. I think for me, it's like me, unlearning kind of some of their language, because like we're gonna discuss the psychology, right? So each religious organization have their own language, the download of the language, like the expressions like of tamahado, taligado.
Right.
I had to kind of like, police myself to stop doing it, or like
Right.
tamahado, like anything went wrong, I'm like, oh, it's tied up,
Oh, by
you
heaven,
know,
right?
vajebenta, or all of those. It's kind of like it was ingrained in me. It was kind of part of like my, like, I would say probably at the end of each sentence,
Mhm.
of
Yeah,
those, right? So
same.
yeah, so that's a little bit of kind of like where, identity crisis comes in, right? So just going back to the church, right? So the name, they go by different names, and so the church was originally founded in 1977 in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro, by the founder, Edir Macedo. So I don't call him, by his title. I will call him by his name, Edir Macedo. And he was basically, now Edir Macedo, when he first started, right? So one thing, this Edima said, when he actually started basically professing to Pentecostal Christianity, he was his family practiced Roman Catholics, and but he became a Pentecostal Christian, around the 70s, in the 60s, like late 60s, early 70s. And
Mhm.
then he went into different, so he was always trying to become a preacher, but he was kind of like the outcast, because there's a huge hierarchy of it. So he's still the head of the Universal Church today. He's still alive and well, alive and kicking. He's He's currently in Brazil, but he travels throughout. Sometimes he's here in the United States. Sometimes he travels to Europe, but he's pretty much active and he still controls most part of the church, right? So the church came to prevalence in Brazil. So how did the church became prevalent in Brazil? So in the time in the basically in the 60s and 70s, there is a book called O Reino, or The Kingdom, by Gilberto Nascimento, and he discusses kind of like where is the birthplace of the universal church. So the book is basically kind of like a trilogy, but like investigation. He he says his sources pretty well in that book. The book is unfortunately in Portuguese, but if you are going to be reading it, is called O Reino by Gilberto Nascimento. I'm going to post it where these books are in the description of the video on YouTube. And he basically talks about that back before Pentecostal became a huge influence in Brazil. Most of the Brazilians said that their religions were Catholic, particularly Roman Catholics in Brazil, due to our influence by Italians. We have tons of Italian heritage, and most of them were Roman Catholics. So Edir Macedo, his family practiced Roman Catholicism, right? But in the reason why he became a Pentecostal, although he was not a very, he didn't practice Catholicism like, he wasn't very religious, but he actually went through a midlife crisis, or through a crisis in his relationship, in his love life, where he had fallen deeply in love with a woman, where during the 60s with the hippie era, where like it's a free love, where he wanted to commit full-fledged to this woman, and she was like, no, I just want to live my life, I don't think I should settle down, and broke up with him. So he was kind of like disoriented, and then he was kind of like feeling very down and all of those. In that time, tons of what they call it today, they're called televangelists. What a televangelist? Televangelists are evangelists that they preach on TV. We still have those today. Turn on TV on Sunday, and you're going to see them on TV, right? So he basically saw it on the radio. So these evangelists were North American missionaries coming to Brazil to basically bring in the Pentecostal Christianity into Brazil. Now, this is where he kind of like began in a little bit of the Pentecostal. The church is kind of says that they are Pentecostal Christianity, and then they branch out into different things of what they are and what they not what they are not in Pentecostal. So there are things that they practice from the Pentecostal Christianity. One of them is not falling on the ground with the Holy Spirit. So they say we don't do that. That we are different, right? There's different types of things, and then these missionaries came to Brazil and they advertised their basically what they're like proposing about God and faith in these radio stations. They bought time slots on television, on radio stations, and amassed large crowds into like sports arena, into stadium. And Macedo was kind of one of those goers in there, right? One of his biggest influence, where he got kind of the idea of purchasing radio stations, one of his biggest move was actually buying a television in Brazil. Was from Jimmy Swaggart. I'm not sure if
Jimmy
you guys
Swagger.
ever heard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Jimmy Swaggart, where he was a huge Pentecostal preacher here in Louisiana. And kind of his downfall came in 1988, where he televised, right, his wrongdoing, which was cheating on his wife with prostitutes. But he saw, like, his crowd, people still continue to go to his church. I think they still do. I think he's still go into those churches in Louisiana. And those were all televised, right? So he saw that those things drove people into church, right?
So he started getting his little
inspirations came from there, right? So these waves of American preachers kind of became kind of like his focus, or his obsession, I would say, of being just like them, right? they started showing up to Brazil in the 60s and 80s and amassing these big crowds. Now, these Brazilian wannabe pastors, I like to say, started wanting to also gain popularity, right? So Macedo joined these other waves of now telling evangelists in Brazil. So initially he was part, so he was part of two different churches before that, but both of them kind of he branched out because they really didn't allow him to become a pastor. He so much as wanted to become a pastor, but he was more of an evangelist. But they would never like really seal the deal of saying you are pastor, right? So then he branched out the first time with his brother-in-law, which is called R.R. Suarez. He leads the Church of the International Church of God's Grace. Now, when he branched out with his brother-in-law, right, they started doing like the spin-off of the branch that they left, created another branch, and then kind of like most of the churches, they have a board of directors. They sit down and discuss it. But R.R. Suarez, he's mostly focused on like kind of the upper middle class of Brazil. He really didn't want to deal with the same
ghettos.
crowd.
Yeah,
The crowd
basically.
that
You call it what
Macedo,
it is.
yeah, let's call it what it is, right? The poor, the impoverished, the people that were not seen or heard. But Macedo really went into those crowds, right? He went where no one wanted to go. People didn't want to, the ill-educated. So most of the church goers of the Universal Church are people really with very little to no education. There's not really a lot of college educated people in within the church. I can
Definitely a
definitely,
minority. If
it's a
it's the minority,
huge huge minority. And
It's
then that,
because,
yeah, go
well,
ahead.
I'm sorry, Sarah, to cut
Yeah,
in. It's
no.
because not only do they not encourage it, but they strongly discourage it, if anything, especially if you're a youth, and you're headed to college. I've, at least when I was coming up in there, if other people have other experiences, that's them. But with me, it's always been discouraged. It's always like it's a waste of time. You should be giving your life to God. You should become a pastor or a pastor's wife, and you don't need college for that. Intelligence of man is foolishness,
Exactly.
basically.
Yeah, we are definitely going to discuss those things in other episodes. I'm definitely going to discuss why pastors in the Universal Church don't have a degree in theology. They don't. None of them have it. Macedo does state that he is a theologist, but actually he doesn't have a college education at all. Yeah, he had
Exactly.
for most of his books, he actually it was written by another pastor that actually, this was a theologist that actually started with him and branched out every single time that he did. He was his
Wow.
ghostwriter. He was like Macedo was the Drake of the of the church.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
so
that
his
makes sense.
all his books have a ghostwriter. So basically, he just signs his name to it, but it's not really he doesn't own the writing. You can actually read through. If you read kind of the books, you can see who's the writer, the editor. It's always somebody else. He just puts his brand on it. Um, you know, so those are kind of the things that people really don't. And people like say, oh, he's like so intelligent. He
Yes.
might be. I'm not sure, but the books that he really didn't write them,
Yeah, it's
right?
not for the reasons that people assume.
Yeah. So going back to like R.R. Suarez, right? R.R. Suarez was busy traveling to the United States, trying to get like kind of more influence or learn a little bit more about becoming a Pentecostal preacher here in the United States, building connections here with other preachers here in the United States, and kind of left Macedo to kind of run things in Brazil, right? And Macedo basically amassed kind of like there were other pastors up and coming as well, where he kind of created kind of an influence around them, where they kicked R.R. Suarez out of the whole deal. So kind of when R.R.
Wow.
Suarez came one day, they were like, well, we are voting. And he kind of like made all the tables turn. And then R.R. Suarez went and branched out into becoming his own church, which is the International Church of God's Grace, which he's also pretty much alive and well, and they basically were like competitors for a very long time. There was actually like kind of like untold,
a rivalry,
a huge rivalry where
yeah,
like they kept going back and forth, taking jabs at each other, even on TV, where our Suarez was basically passive aggressive, but Macedo was pretty aggressive with how he said, like, I'm
That
not
makes
like one
sense.
of these little preachers that go in and talk about it's everything Sunday morning. I'm here to battle. And it, you know, we're going to discuss kind of a little bit of how he's preaching
the
actually on those,
aggression,
the
Yeah.
aggression,
yeah,
which is like, I think most pastors in the universal church, they speak like, they almost scream at time, like I think they scream the
absolutely.
entire, like
They yell like the entire time.
time, like
Absolutely.
I can hear you just fine, and like you don't need to raise the volume or your
Mhm.
voice, right? So let's fast forward a little bit, right? So after different so the church actually started really picking up in the 90s, where they were massing these large crowds, these impoverished people that came from humble beginnings, people that were ill-educated. So they started getting pretty much known for that, right? That was kind of the I would
The
say
stigma, like the stigma or the reputation
it,
they had.
and also kind of like how they became like, if they had the other branches of the church, and they were like, oh, if you're poor, impoverished, live in the favelas, here's the branch for you to go, Macedo's church, right? And he
Mm.
started amassing large followings like that, right? um
Mm.
so then they started with different branches. So he started in Abolição, which is like the downtown of Rio de Janeiro. And like the first church was basically like his mother was kind of his co-signer on the lease. Basically, he didn't have any money. He started from, really from, he basically was like entering and not really knowing what he was doing, and started like just getting the following. So he had like members. One member would say like would pay rent. Another member would provide the chairs. The other one kind of putting all of those together, right? And he just focused on that, and then it started growing. So then the church started growing in different cities, then states. Then Macedo started taking out like time slots in radios, to bring in more people, bring in and mostly his radio time slots were mostly, and it's all a marketing, right? Was mostly like around midnight, 11 p.m., midnight, 1 a.m., where people that are
Mhm.
listening to the radio, people like either suffering from insomnia, suffering from any type of like mental illnesses. And then they were like that was the only thing on the radio to kind of listen to, because it was either music or like listening to the news. And then you had Macedo talking about
Mm.
hope, giving you hope, the word of hope. um and then he kind of just did kind of like almost like in the R&B radio, kind of like a soft voice,
The
talking
DJ
about like
voice.
the little DJ, although he doesn't have a
You're
DJ
listening
voice,
to 92 3.0. Kind of
There
but
you
he
that kind of
go.
stuff.
kind of that stuff, but he doesn't really have a DJ voice, but it was very mellow, very kind of like
He
you
brought
they're
like the
suffering. Yeah,
calmness.
yeah, his tone was like, if you're suffering, if you don't see a way out, you're thinking about committing suicide tonight, just know that there is an answer.
So
Come
very
to like,
like melodic, right? Like with a
yeah, very
medley.
melodic. Yeah,
Gotcha.
very melodic. He had tons of like sound effects. He's big on like movies. And also he loves taking pictures, so he's like a big photographer as well, so he kind of like into that as well. So one of the hobbies that Macedo loves is taking pictures. um so therefore he's so that's kind of like his target audience, so I would like to say. So people that were thinking like, oh, I was about to commit suicide, I came here because I heard that you have a way out. Coming in, I'm a drunken, or I've been abused, or all of those things. That who he amassed to
So
come in.
basically people that are pretty desperate.
Pretty desperate. And then like kind of like his whole spiel was basically like he created kind of the Monday service the Tuesday service, Wednesday. So his marketing is, my church is open 7 days a week. You will never find out my door shut. You can come in as you are. If you have financial problems, you come on a Monday, I'll make a prayer for you. You have a health issue, you come on a Tuesday, I'll pray for you. If let's like in order for you to heal from all of this, we will have a Wednesday. But it wasn't always like it is today. Like Mondays, we know that Mondays is for financial, Tuesdays for healing, Wednesdays for like the Bible study, Thursdays for family, Fridays for demon possessions, and then Saturdays like kind of like a mix of everything you didn't get done on Monday through Friday. You come on a Saturday and get it done. And then Sunday is kind of like the big event that everyone should be coming, right? So he catered to all of these different issues to a mass following to the church. Now, he wasn't really satisfied, so he started like growing. Like, we're gonna talk about the scandals. We're gonna have a whole episode about scandals in Brazil, because kind of like you guys are going to understand that here the church really keeps it PG, but in Brazil the church amassed tons of scandals, and some of these scandals even got Macedo arrested, spending like, but he was actually like, when he got arrested, he actually got viewed as a martyr, like brought people to the to the in front of the police station. He basically said, I'm being persecuted because I'm growing too big, I'm amassing influence, blah blah blah. And then he became a martyr, and then kind of like whoever was planning on his demise kind of like got shut down, right?
Right. Well, if I could just say something. So all the backstory that you're giving, like with the radio thing, because we're here, we're doing this podcast, but we're also unpacking things real time too, because this is a real conversation that we're having.
Exactly.
This wasn't rehearsed at all. So like him starting out with the radio, objectively, I feel like that was a very smart move. I feel like he was doing the right things to grow at that time. But also it makes me feel like a person who really does have a heart to help people would start like that too. So that's where it kind of makes it confusing, because it's like, okay, that's why I have parts, or I have moments where I really believe sincerely that in the beginning there was a good intention to help people and everything, but it's, those of you guys that are watching, you have to follow along the story, because as it progresses, you will see like how Sara is mentioning scandals. And we're not even like in the 2000s yet. We're still talking about the 80s.
In the 90s. Yeah, we're talking about in the 90s. Like 90s was basically like tons of scandals, right? So in the 70s, and then 70s kind of went pretty well. And then it just like, more with more power.
More money, more problems.
Yes.
No, that's what it is. It's more money, more problems. That's
more money, more problems. And he started also amassing tons of like, he started wanting to get into politics. We're going to discuss that as well. Like, the church has a huge influence in politics in Brazil, where he has tried here in the US, but you have to realize that in the United States, most of the following in the United States are immigrants. Not only immigrants, but also undocumented immigrants. That's why, you don't see politicians coming to the church and kind of saying, hey, vote for us, right? Because if he was one of the big churches in the United States, you would have seen the church kind of having a foothold within politics. But that is not so much. But they do have it in other countries. South Africa is another one that they have. Europe, not as much, but South Africa is another one where they meddle with politics there as well, on those, right? But then Macedo started with radio stations first. He started buying small little radio stations, and then he kind of got like, oh, I'm not yet satisfied with just radio. Let's go big or go home. I want a TV this time, right? I'm going to discuss a little bit, because that has to be an entire episode of how it began. But just to kind of give you guys
summarize.
a highlight was when he was deciding to purchase the TV, it was large amounts of money, which he didn't have. Basically, the like I said, the people that come to the church are people that are from humble background. So
Yeah.
you don't have like a millionaire that says, hey, I'm gonna front you all of this money. So, you know, where did he get the idea of like, where did he amass all of this, right? Campaign of Israel is one of the biggest generator of money into
Mm-hmm.
the universal church, right? In
Absolutely.
back in the 80s or early 90s, it was once a year. Now it's twice a year. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're smart enough and you can do the math, it's a lot of money,
And a
But
tons
lot
of
of
money.
mini campaigns in
every other month
between.
Yeah,
has
let's not talk about,
mid-tier campaign, right? On
yeah,
top
let's
of
not
the
talk about the
daily.
spin-offs. I like to call it the spin-off campaigns. Like, the if you didn't give
They've
your money
gotten
then,
more.
yeah,
Yeah,
you
exactly.
know,
And they've
you
become more like throughout the years.
you go to a service, you leave with 5 envelopes, no questions
Yes.
asked.
No,
No questions
seriously.
asked. 5 envelopes, right? And then, like, if you don't raise your hand, you're gonna find one sitting on your chair at some point, right? Like,
Hmm.
it's
Or
pushing
on the way
envelopes
out. On the
on
way
the
out,
all the way out is those pamphlets,
handing
man.
them out.
Like, handing them out. They've become aggressive now. They put it on your chest and like,
Oh
walk.
my gosh.
You gotta leave with it, you know.
I
Um,
haven't been in a minute. I have not been in a minute to a branch. So I do
I
not
mean,
know how they operate as of late.
no. So then the church now had grown in Brazil, right? So now they were expanding into South America. So they had gone into Colombia, into like Argentina, but now, and then they were starting to, start, traveling upwards to the north. Mexico was
Right.
another one where they started, and then Macedo always wanted to do the U.S., right? But
Hmm.
he in the United States in 1986, it was when he kind of started heading way to start opening the church. But here, there's tons of politics. Like, the church has to be registered with the Christian society. Like, there's a Christian society, or like a group where they must approve and recognize you as a religious organization. Um, Macedo
Hmm.
is not really big on patience. He's not
Right, right.
Patience is not his
What?
strongest suits. Uh,
What?
Patience is not his strongest suits. I think, like, I used to remember when I was little. I'm sure you guys probably heard this, but whenever he wanted to get something done, he was like, I needed this for yesterday, right? Kind of like letting
Oh
you know, like,
yeah.
this was supposed to get done yesterday. So if you don't have it by my desk by tomorrow, forget about it. And he kind of
Hmm.
used that over a lot of people's head, to kind of like
Hmm.
promote them or demote them because they didn't
Hmm.
get the job done, right? So most pastors and bishops inside of the universal church are on edge, because their
Yeah.
livelihood depends on it. You can be on like the biggest church today, and then you just like go to the smallest church with no value at all, stripped away
Hmm.
of all of your of your rights, and that's how he keeps power. He stays in power, and he
Hmm.
controls that entire hierarchy, right? There's like, you don't know what tomorrow will bring on those.
Hmm.
But
And
here,
objectively, oh, I'm so
objective, yeah,
sorry.
no, no, go ahead. No, no.
I'm like I love playing devil's advocate. It's like my thing. So objectively, that's like, okay, he has the power and the, how do I say, like, it's his right to
Hmm.
put someone to another place, to send them off if they haven't been doing their job. But
Hmm.
the issue is, like the measuring that is being used, because a lot of times the ones that stay in power only stay in power because they bring in a lot of money or whatever the case is.
Yeah,
But
it's
if they
based on
messed up a
on
certain,
financial. Yeah, you,
exactly.
you can say it like it is. It's all based on like how much money
Hmm.
you can get from the people. That's
Yeah,
how you
because
you
I want,
maintain power.
right. And I want the viewers to know that it's like, oh, we're not hating on the fact that like he's moving people around. It's his whatever, his organization that he started. But it's like the measurement that is being used, because then a lot of the good ones get sent to such like demeaning, horrible conditions just because of something that they did that was not even a big deal, or just because they weren't bringing in enough funds, for example, or
Yep.
something like that. And
Yeah.
so there's a lot of injustice when it comes to that. So I can't wait till we start talking about
Yeah,
that.
and like so going back to, because now right now we are just discussing Brazil, right? So in Brazil, pastors actually dread the northern part of Brazil. Like if you go to the south part of Brazil, the southern part of Brazil, like Rio de Janeiro, São Paulo, and the lower states like Minas Gerais, Rio Grande do Sul, you're probably gonna have a much better life and a much better amenities. I like to say, like your house is gonna be
Yeah.
a little bit better, not as
The
great.
perks are better.
Yeah, you get the perks. The church in Brazil works in blocks, right? So they call it blocks because they're like, I believe in Brazil there's over 10,000 branches, if I'm not mistaken, might be
Wow.
more. Um, each branch, like there's like tons of cathedrals. The cathedrals are like the big
The
headquarters that they
headquarters.
call us. Yeah, and they're like, so therefore it's like so the churches is like the cathedral is where they all gather to bring it, and then you have the nucleos, like the smaller little branches on like the small neighborhoods,
Special works.
the special works and all of those, but they're like little small branches, literally. And then you have the bigger, a little bit of the bigger church, which was like the initial churches that came in there, like from sometimes they've been there like from the 90s or even the early 2000s. They're a little bit bigger, spaces. Those churches, they take care of the block, and then they
Right.
report to the mother church, right? um and then those pastors like have so many different perks. We're going to discuss all of that as well. I'm going to discuss a little bit of that as well, how that hierarchy works. But basically, like when you get stripped, let's say you were taking care of that bigger branch and you didn't do too well, you can be sent into a nuclear church, and
Right.
and then with that comes also a downgrade of your salary
Your pay
too.
cut.
Yes.
You get a pay cut. You don't get like, so you get pay cut and pay increases is all relevant. So it's basically like a Shark Tank kind of, sort of
Mhm.
speak in there,
Mhm.
And
where
just
they
to
are.
that, and just to
Yeah.
that, I'm so sorry to cut you off, but I remember working
No,
in South
cut me off.
America. They told me, they were like, the pastors in those special works, right? Their incentive to grow is not just to save souls, but they're actually told, you who have a tiny salary today, you need to have faith and vision to grow. Like if you get more people, then you'll get a better house and this, that, the other. So they're basically encouraging or enticing the pastors at small locations to start viewing filling up the church and expansion as a personal gain, not just building the kingdom.
Exactly.
As
No,
much as
it's
they may
not
try to
saving
say
souls.
that
It's not
there's not a
saving
second
souls.
intention, but think about it. If you're starving in a location and the leader just cut your salary in half and you tell him, hey, I'm not being able to pay my car this month, and
Hmm.
his response is, grow your church and you'll be fine.
Yep.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Literally. And we've heard those words.
Yeah, so in
Mhm.
the USA, like you can attest to this. Here you are able to finance your car. In Brazil and in these other countries, the pastor's not able to purchase a car because their salary won't be able to pay for a car. There's no such thing as finance, right? So the church actually have fleets of car. You don't do
Mm.
well, it could be the difference between you having to
Um,
take the bus
Mm.
to
wow.
your church, or walk there, or not have a car at all. So I do remember parts of like my childhood where my dad didn't have a car. He was basically cycling to work with one bicycle. My mom,
Wow.
myself, my brother, all on the same bike, like
Mm.
riding.
No,
Yes,
Sarah.
yes,
Oh
to
my
the church, right?
gosh.
So it wasn't like, and then I do remember like this funny story. So like, let's say the funny story, right? So I remember like this was a Saturday, which was like one of the rare occasions when my dad was home, and my dad was like, Brazil is big on like barbecues, right? Churrasco. And I
Mm.
do
Mm-hmm.
remember this funny story about the bicycle that I would like. I remember to this day where my mom was like, "Oh, you need to go to the butcher shop. You need to go get the meat." And then my because my brother and I, we didn't have my dad home so much. We when we got to be with him, we wanted to be with him like everywhere he went, we were like following him around. So like, oh, take us, Dad. And my dad's like, I'm gonna go by bike. And we're like, no, we will ride with you. So I was sitting like in the front of the bike where like, you know,
The
the hand,
basket,
like
the handles.
not even
handles?
basket, the handle, where the handle was at, like just on that pole. My dad was sitting on the chair, and then there was like kind of like a little thing in the back to carry someone, right? So my brother was sitting there. So my dad goes to the butcher shop, and then he brings like almost like 3 pounds of meat on there. And then he tells my brother, like, hold on to this, right? Don't let go, because this is like our food. Like, this is like, so he starts pedaling, right? So the
Oh,
bag is so
no.
big. The bag is so big that my brother kind of like, he has no space left. And then I hear my brother say, Dad, I'm falling, I'm slipping. My dad's like, no, don't let the meat drop, don't let the meat. And then he's like, Sarah, help your brother out. So my dad was telling me to like hold on to my brother. I was like, no, I'm gonna hold on to the meat. My brother falls. My brother falls to the
Priorities. I'm not even
Priorities
mad.
is right. She was trying
Priorities.
Yes, priorities. I held on, and like my dad kept pedaling, and then my dad's like started going faster, and I'm like, and then all I hear is like my brother crying on the street, and then the guy in the car was like, sir, your son just got left behind. My dad's like, oh man, I gotta go back for Leo. And then he kind of like, yeah. So funny story.
Oh my gosh. That is
Yeah.
hilarious.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
All
probably,
because
like,
your father didn't have a car.
well, my dad was, all because my dad didn't have a car. And then my dad,
Yeah.
I think was like 3 or 4 months later, my dad finally got given a car. And it was like a car that was like almost like falling into pieces, because my dad was like just starting with 2 kids, right? Was just starting, and therefore was like he got the car. So the car was like mostly like we had to push most of the time. So many issues. I will go over those ones too. I have some funny stories. Yeah, we have to laugh so we don't cry, right?
Oh, you have to.
Yeah.
So Eddie Macedo was starting to come to the USA, right? So that's why I'm bringing it in. Like, how did the church start in the United States? It started in 1986. Macedo met with this other pastor who had heard about Macedo from somewhere, and he was pretty excited to meet him and learn a little bit about how he, grew his base, right? His name is Forrest Higginbotham. You may know him, Anthony. You may know his son, because you worked with a little bit with him.
I was his assistant for a while.
Yep. So he had a church, which was the Second Avenue Church in New York. That was his original church. That was Forrest's Higginbotham Church. It was like in the Lower East Side in New York.
Yeah.
I think the church is still there, because it's always like there's a church in the bottom, and then the Universal Church is on the top. And it was always funny because the pastor in the bottom church always said like, hey, I'm gonna go on vacation, and can you take care of my parish for me while I'm away? So the parish used to come to the church for like a month. And then when the pastor from the bottom church came back, the members used to go back to going back as regular as usual. And then like I always heard the pastor that was in that branch like, oh, this pastor goes on vacation. What type of pastor is he? I'm like, it's a pastor that takes vacation. A normal one that takes vacation.
Probably living a lot healthier, a lot of, aware of mental wellness and all this stuff, because vacations and breaks are much needed. This was so stigmatized. If you felt like you were taking a break, you were made to feel like you must be forgetting something, because there is no time for breaks,
Absolutely. Yeah. So then therefore, so this is a kind of a little bit of the church background. So how kind of a high level, we're going to deep dive into different parts of areas of the church, but this is how the church, so Forrest Higginbotham, he kind of opened the way for the church to gain a foothold in the United States. So the way the church kind of got a backing is to have another pastor that was established, registered here, to kind of be kind of like the doorway into the church coming here. So when Macedo came in, he had a language barrier. His children kind of suffered a little bit because they didn't know the language. The people here really didn't know who he was, how big he was, and he kind of had to start it all over, right? So, but at this time, when you have a kind of a taste of success of how big you could be, like you starting from the bottom is gonna be a little bit frustrating. Where he said, like, Americans really don't take time to really understand me. They really don't, don't know who I am, blah blah blah. But the church has been struggling for years. Like, the church has grown in here, but not as big as it could be in other countries. Like the United States is one of the places
Right.
where they basically struggle the most to grow their base, only because like the members that they have here, most likely they already knew about the church in their home countries, and now they're coming here, right? But they have never been able to grow their base on like the actual American, you know following at all.
I don't see it ever happening either.
Yeah, but
It
just
won't.
important facts about Brazil, and about the Universal Church, right? So the Universal Church, in a newspaper called Folha de São Paulo in 2017, posted that the UCKG reported that they have 1.8 million followers worldwide. 1.8 million followers worldwide. That was in 2017. I don't know, maybe their numbers have dropped, or but in 2017 that was what they had registered as members. Because remember, when you get baptized, you have to fill up your card, and they kind of
Mhm.
keep track of that, right? So therefore, that is kind of where it is.
If
So,
if I'm
mhm,
honest, that number kind of surprises me because
really,
I thought it was a lot more. Yeah. I don't know. I thought it was a lot more. What do you think, Anthony? Do you think that's a small number or a big number?
I think it's too big for
Worldwide,
them.
worldwide.
I
Oh
think it's
no,
too big for them.
absolutely.
No, but
Absolutely. But I
I
just thought
mean,
objectively it was more.
it could be. I mean, I think there's more ex-members than members.
Yeah, oh yeah. I think
That's
so
I think the
too.
tricky part, because there's a lot
Yeah.
of like
How do
there's
you
a lot of
define?
circulation of people in there, right? There's a big
yep,
recycling, people coming in and out, some people never come
Mhm.
back. So maybe 1.8 million like within the institution at this
registered, and
point in time,
and I
that
Mhm.
think,
could sound
yeah,
right.
yeah, and I think from Stephanie's point of view is these are the ones that they have registered as members. So you could be right,
That's true.
Steph.
Yeah.
So you could be right
Yeah.
on like thinking that much might be higher, because on a higher level, I think the newspaper did mention that on an unregistered level was a much higher number. So I'm just giving you the numbers based on what they
Gotcha.
actually
Makes sense.
register as their faithful members, right? Of the devout members worldwide. So if you think that the Universal Church is just like a little neighborhood church that just popped out of nowhere, you could be
Uh-uh.
mistaken. So,
Mhm.
yeah, any final thoughts? So we're gonna end the first episode here now. But any final thoughts about a little bit about like a little bit of the history, a little bit about the how the church got to be, the introduction to us a little bit.
I think it's
Anything else?
interesting you mentioned how like Macedo, he basically outgrew two different churches before founding his own, but he severely frowns upon people stepping away from his church, even though
Yeah,
he himself has experienced moments in his life where moving on was, deemed the right thing to do. God was calling
Yep.
him to do that. He has such a tough time accepting when other people feel that they're being called away from his place. So I just find that
yep,
really interesting, because he
yeah.
wouldn't
That's a good
exist if he
point.
practiced what he preached. Like the
Absolutely.
UCKG wouldn't even be a thing, right? So I thought that was
Yeah,
very interesting.
yeah,
And piggybacking off of that, I thought it was interesting how you said that his church was kind of a spin-off from the other previous churches that he went to. And so when people leave, they usually form another spin-off of another little universal church. Like
yep.
they end up doing campaigns, they end up doing, all the same things. A lot of them,
Mhm.
maybe not all of them. But it's so funny because he'll criticize that and he'll judge that. Like, oh, these
And
pastors, they gain all
he
this
will not
knowledge.
only criticize, right? He will also like set like kind of like send like out, what do you call it, like in like send bad vibes, I like to say, like send his,
Uh,
like
Mhm.
curse them in some way, shape, or form.
Gotcha.
Where if something happens to them, I think that there was like two different, there was another like big key player in the church, where he decided to open his church, and he became pretty big in Brazil as well, with a large following in the north part of Brazil. That now I think last year, the year before, he filed for bankruptcy, where he was celebrating. He's like, "Oh, you
Mm.
see, I knew he was," but
Wow.
he was one of the lasted like pretty long
Mm.
in there as well. Then there is like Renato Suetti, which is, he was like kind of like the like everyone was in love with him because he made a lot of Christian songs, and he was kind of like put a lot of records out for he this was in the 90s. I still remember when he decided to kind of part ways with the church, where he opened
Mm.
his own church. Eventually he came back a few years later, and then I think he left again, but it was kind of like the on and off as well. They've been, and I think you guys are right? He doesn't like when people leave his ministry, where he kind of
Mhm.
he did the same thing, time and
Mhm.
time again. One big thing as well that I failed to mention, that I think is important as well for the first episode, is why is Macedo so like adored by almost like his entire base, right? Because the way he marketed himself is kind of like the underdog, right? He's been put aside by when he was a childhood. Even
Mm.
if you read his biography, if you guys haven't read his biography, he
Oh, we were
basically
forced to when it
yeah,
came out.
we were forced to read it. Like, I wasn't forced to read it because I really, if you ask me, like, I read books for fun, and I just read to just critique it, right? It was an easy read and kind of goes. But if you pay attention to like how he basically, depicts himself even in childhood, was that he was always like the kid that was bullied, the kid that was an underdog. He
Right.
came up impoverished, which is not entirely true. Like, his family did come from humble beginnings, but his family actually like try to open businesses. His family did try many different businesses, but failed. Right. So he did come from an entrepreneurial mindset of family, as well.
Mm.
And but he basically says like, "Oh, I didn't have anything to eat. My mom used to cook food," and and which is partially true, all of that. But they lived on like a huge farm. I think he's one of 23 kids, if I'm
Wow.
not mistaken.
Ooh, I
I
mean,
believe
yeah, I
I
mean,
mean,
you
that was
got
on
23
TV.
kids. I'm sorry,
And
yeah, you gonna struggle a little bit unless you Nick Cannon. If you Nick Cannon, then
then
he
yeah.
he can have the 23 kids and still keep going. He read
So
one
his
verse in the
family,
Bible, fill the earth,
yeah.
and he took it as a mission.
Yeah. So he's one of 23 kids. I like to say it like he comes from a time where TV wasn't very popular in Brazil. Television. It was a time
Okay.
before television,
Right.
right?
There was
So
nothing
you're
to
all
do. People got
there was
bored.
no exactly. So and he was also from like the rural area too. So it's pretty common on those.
Okay.
So and also he also discusses his disability, which he does have, what like his hand, if people don't hasn't noticed, is that he has like his thumb, right? There's
The
you know
deformity.
a deformity on his thumb. So he basically says that that was the reason why he was bullied for most of the time, but that really didn't impede him of like accomplishing anything that he did. But yet he does have a disability, and he basically marketed himself on it. Then he also discussed that his daughter was born as well with a health deformity as well, where he kind of struggled with that as well. So basically, kind of the way he marketed himself is kind of like the guy
You
that
sympathize, right?
you sympathize with them here, right?
Yeah, you
Right,
feel
in a,
bad for
in a
him
way,
almost.
you
Yeah.
feel bad for
Not
him.
only that, but you resonate and you want to see that person win because you
Yeah.
feel like an underdog in your life and you want to win. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and this is how kind of like his following kind of says like, "Oh, but he can have a TV. He can have a house in Miami that is worth $8 million. He can have all of
Exactly.
this because he struggled through life, right?" And
Mm-hmm.
kind of make the excuses for it, right? So a lot of people kind of don't realize that that is kind of like he marketed himself that way, so you can feel pity on him and say, "Well, but the way he preaches is that you are allowed to have this. Great that you're allowed to have all of this, but your members don't have half of the things you do, right?"
Hmm.
Yeah.
So therefore it's kind of like the things that we're going to dive into. So with that being said, we are reaching our hour, so we're gonna, come back for more. We're gonna do a second episode as well. But thanks for watching. And Stephanie, you're the one who's handling this, right? To like, follow. You're gonna be the next
Yes.
episode. Let's remind. So, what do you remember our handles for people to find us on social media?
Yes, guys, you already know. Hit that subscribe button, like, support our work if this is something that you feel like resonates with you at all. I hope that it does. I hope that here you find um, people that are voicing feelings and sentiments that you've had for a long time. So, yeah, follow us. You can find us on Instagram and on TikTok, The Dark Side of Devotion. And yeah, I hope that you guys enjoy following us and comment. Let us know if there's any particular topics that you'd like us to touch on. We have like a huge array of topics already, but I feel like we'll never run out of subject matter. But
It's a
No, I
throw
don't
broad
think
in.
so.
subject.
Oh yeah,
It's a very broad
absolutely.
subject. Yeah.
But I'd love to
And
hear
yet,
from other people and what they want to know.
absolutely. Anthony, any final thoughts?
I'm just ready for episode 2. Let's get to it.
All right, guys. Till next time. Bye.
Bye.
This is the Dark Side of Devotion. Thanks for watching another episode of A Dark Side of Devotion.